Hi, John.
Oh, yeah,
Hi, you okay?
yeah, good, thanks. And you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Um, so I'm just going to pause it on the opening MGM lion shot, and we'll sort of do a
Hopefully.
countdown, press play from there.
Okay, I've got the lion on his second roar.
Okay, I'll put him on second roll as well. Okay, there we go. Okay, all paused. Okay, right. So I'll just away, just got my notes. Yep, away to go. So if you're happy, John, we'll make a
Yeah,
start.
okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so well, thanks, John, for wanting to talk about A View to Kill. It's very much appreciated. So for those that are watching this on YouTube, if they want to watch the film as we go along, we've just paused on the second war of the MGM Lion. So I'll do a countdown from five, and we'll press play.
Okay.
So five, four, three, two, one, and play. Um, so there's quite an interesting credit on the front saying about the name Zolan. Do you remember that at the time being a bit of a
I
problem?
do, and I was trying to remember why. I know um, I've just killed the sound by end. Um, I can't quite remember why. It was something to do with it being emblazoned on the airship, and there was somebody or there was a company around called Zorin. Um, Something was going on at the time, but I can't remember exactly what.
I think there's definitely, I think there was a fashion designer that had sort of a similar name, and there was
Yeah,
somebody else as well. So I think it's different enough, but I think just to avoid any problems, I think they just thought it safe, well, safer than sorry to remove it. So this film starts off as a combination of Iceland and Switzerland. Of course, you're doing the Iceland part of the sequence. What do you
but
remember from that?
yeah. I mean, this is all sort of mixed up because we filmed. Uh, this was in um, Switzerland, um, in the mountains above San Moritz, I think. Um, and we're cutting to and fro with Iceland, um, where we went up there on an early recce, and then I sent my guys up there, Johnny Morris, who was running the unit at the time, and Joss Williams was looking after the second unit shoot here in Switzerland with Arthur Worcester. So it was all a bit mixed together. Um, of course, we had the great ski team of Willie Bogner and co as always. Um, who when I watched this again the other day, it still impresses me their skiing attributes. Um, we went to special pains with the bullet hits that you've just seen to um, make something that was big and bright and um, rather than just a puff of white dust. Um, and then, all these gags were carefully worked out, how to whip the guy off the uh, ski mobile and just, generally make the whole gag work, coupled in with all these stunts that were going on at the same time. Um, and it was all done for real. I mean, that's the great thing about it is there's not one bit of an iffy front projection shot there, but we won't talk about that. The the main thing was to get this reality into it, and it also, this was one of the first times uh, a snowboard, I think, had been used in a movie like this, because they were just really coming in on the ski slopes at the time. So, as always with Bond, it was a bit ahead of the game. Um, and all this action stuff is what made Bond so special in the first place, I think. Um, Even, this gag was done for real. There was nothing um, clever or rigged about it. They actually did it. Um, and then, this shot that's coming up um, with the flare into the helicopter. I mean, that's a model shot there, shot in Iceland. Um, and trying to, figure out how to make this work with the flare in the helicopter and the smoke. Um, Again, we did that with a small charge in the model. This is all model again. Um, it was flown by, I think, John Griffith and Nigel Brackley between them. And then the boat that we see here, we built at Pinewood. That was a fiberglass shell constructed on an inflatable boat with an outboard. And we took it up to Iceland and drove it through the icebergs just outside a town called Hof. Um, but it's all real icebergs and real things. I remember one thing that did happen there was the crew were all they broke for lunch, and they'd all got their lunch boxes, and they got onto an iceberg to sit and have their lunch, and all of a sudden the iceberg started to tilt and flip over, and there was a bit of a emergency escape into the boats, so they didn't all end up in the water. But again, apart from the fact that shot was speeded up a little bit, it all looked very real. And now, of course, we're on to the great man's title sequence, as always, which again we had a lot of fun with Morris Binder doing this because we cast figures in ice, and I got a refrigerator truck into Pinewood, and a lot of we made molds for these and filled them full of distilled water to get as much clarity as we could, and then froze them overnight so that we could then melt them down with flames and heat and different things. That again was a bit of a learning curve and a challenge, because if you froze them too quickly, then you got air bubbles in them, which Morris didn't want. And we were trying to get, really crystal clear ice. Oh, look at that name up there. It was, yeah, even as I say, the title sequences were fun to do and inventive at the time.
And Maurice was a I take it a fun guy to work with.
Yeah, sorry, say again.
I take Maurice was quite a fun guy to
Oh,
work with.
Morris was a real character, but he was a very talented character, and just fun from my point of view, fun to work with.
Yeah.
Could be a bit frustrating to some of the people around, but that was the charm of having the privilege to work with all these, the Bond team.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all wonderful sequences, aren't they? And I think he was a bit of a perfectionist. I think it was one of the last things to come together before the premiere was the title. So
I mean, we shot all this on the stage at Pinewood. And we had a ski slope, and you know, it was inventive stuff. It was good to be involved in.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, so just as we go in cut in between the bits and pieces you did on the film, I wanted to ask you, because you started working on, I think, was it Lawrence Arabia with your father, Cliff, and that's how you got interested in the business?
Yeah, I mean, my father had been in the business since 1921, so I I grew up on film sets basically. Um, and then in the 1960, he was doing Exodus, which was, I think, the first film um, I actually worked on with him, um, directed by Otto Preminger. I had three parts in the movie, or three jobs in the movie. One was working in special effects with my dad. The other one was working in accounts, um, helping them sort all the bills out. And the third one was a small part directed by Preminger, which I've always said firmly convinced me never to stand on that side of the camera again.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, then I, you know, went on from that, and I used to go away in school holidays, wherever my father was on location, and he was doing Lawrence. They'd moved by then from Jordan to the south of Spain. So you know, I was lucky enough to spend time working with him down there on that. And then I think the next year was on um, the Victors with him. I just finished my O-level exams, couldn't wait to get away from school. So went and worked on the Victors, which again was a very well cast war movie or anti-war movie, directed by the lovely Carl Foreman. And then the following year went off on my first full location film, which was directed by Lewis Gilbert with Bill Holt and Capuchin, Susanna York, called The Seventh Dawn, which was filmed in Malaya. And here I am, what, 50, 60 years later.
So your mum and dad were always very happy for you to go into the industry. They never said it's a bit
No,
precarious or
my
anything like that.
father at one point said, "You'll come into the industry over my dead body," which fortunately didn't happen. And you know, then he realised that that was what I wanted to do. You grow up with a father that blows things up and burns things down for a living. Um, you know, the incentive is sort of ingrained. So it was just a natural for me anyway to do it. He accepted it, and he wanted me to be a research chemist. And in fact, I had an offer from BP, British Petroleum, to go and work as a trainee chemist, which I really didn't want to do. Um, yeah, films were a natural segue for me.
Did your dad ever give you a bit of advice that stays with you in terms of working in the business?
He gave me a bit of uh, rather rude advice once on the picture in Malaya. We were pumping gear up and down on the roof of a prison to make rain, and the production kept changing their mind whether they were going to film down at the gate first or up inside the building first, which meant I had to, and it was only me doing it, pull all this rain gear up to the roof and then take it down again. And then looked up. And I got a little bit fed up with it because we weren't actually doing it, and started to bitch and complain. And my father turned around rather uh, annoyed and said, if you don't like it, you can F off now, um, because this is the film industry. And yeah, if you don't like it, don't do it. You know, that was the moral. And, you know, films have been wonderful to me, but there are times that you get a little frustrated. You've just got to smile and get on with it, you know.
Because it's a quite punishing work schedule, isn't it? I mean, it's you know.
Well, you know, films, you know, particularly on location, and most of the movies that we did in those days were on location. I mean, I was spending probably 8 months a year in the Far East or Spain or, you know, all over the world, Israel. Um, and you're working 6 days a week, uh, probably 10 or 12 hours at least every day. So you don't get a lot of time to yourself, but you know, you form good relationships with the rest of the crew, and you get together and you know, go out in the evening or whatever, and you make the best of it. Uh, so, you know, from that point of view, I feel very privileged that um, it was hard work, but we had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
The,
So,
the scene, sorry, the scene that's up now is in the uh, restaurant in the Eiffel Tower, although this in fact was a set, but we ended up having to go there to have lunch to check it out, which was um, quite good because it was a fabulous restaurant. Um,
because I think now. Oh, sorry, go on, John.
no, well, I was just going to say that the scene involves this butterfly um, that was flying around the guy, which killed him in the end, as we'll see in a minute. Um, but there was an act in France, and the man that did the act owned a hotel just outside Paris. So we went down to have a demonstration of his act, which he did in the garden outside the hotel. So we stayed there overnight, had dinner, then went out in the garden in the pouring rain um, to see a demonstration of this butterfly, and then transferred it and did it back in Pinewood Studios. But it was a very funny evening because I think it was about 6 or 8 of us, with the producers and John Glenn, myself, Tony Wade, Tom Petzler, all sitting outside in the pouring rain with newspapers on our head, watching a butterfly in the rain. It's one of those strange, funny things that happens on a movie.
Hmm. Of course, you'd have had to build the one that actually goes into that bit would be
Yeah,
your apartment.
I can't remember how we did all of it now, but it was a combination of this Frenchman who had the act, uh, makeup with the hook in the face, and we did some stuff with you know, very fine wires as usual. Um, and then of course there's the whole chase on the Eiffel Tower, which again, very privileged because we got to go where the public can't usually, right up to the top. So that was an interesting shoot, shall we say?
Hmm. So you'd have to put the bullet hits in and perhaps a bit with a fishing pole, and you'd be doing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean we were doing all the bullet hits, and of course everything we had to be incredibly careful that nothing ever dropped or fell because it could fall on somebody way down below.
Mm.
And we had to do all this. You'll see on this shot the diving board that the
Mm.
uh, skydivers put out to jump from, because they had to get out a far enough distance away from the tower, because of course the tower
Mm.
curves out as it goes down. So it was one of the things that nobody very liked very much. And in today's world, you'd probably paint that out with CGI, but in those days, you couldn't do it on a shot like that.
Yeah, as a fan, you wonder whether they should, in future editions, remove the board, or there's a few things in the Bond films you think, well, actually keep it as it was. It's just part of the
I
charm, isn't it?
think that's all part of the charm, and there's so much action going on throughout, particularly this film. Um, I think people accepted those because you know there was so much else to look at with all these stunts and the car stuff, and um, the Remy Julianne's work on this chase, which again was all a combination of um, special effects and Remy's work. Um, Arthur Worcester, who did a great job as always on the second unit, um, and of course models, which are interspersed throughout the movie. So some of this is a bit pushing the envelope, shall we say, of believability, but I think overall it comes across quite well. And of course, it was Roger's last outing as Bond.
Yeah, I think he I think it's a really good film for him to go out on as well. I think it's a very strong, it's a very, quite dark in places as well. And I think it's not Roger's favorite film, from what I can understand, because it is quite violent, particularly towards the end. And I think he preferred more sort of the more gentler Spy and Love
Mm.
Me, Moonraker sort of, films. But um, um, I don't think it was the producers thought he was too old to do another one. I think he just wanted to walk away. I think he felt it was the right time to go.
Yeah, I mean, Roger was um, actually older than Sean, I think. Um, and it was, the films are physically quite hard for the actor playing Bond, because it's not just walking around and laughing and joking. You've got to be able to run, and Roger always said himself he ran like a giraffe. Um, so um, I think he'd reached a point where he thought, I've done my bit. It's time to hand it over to somebody else.
Mm.
And there were the usual murmurs from the press that Roger was starting to look his age a bit, which, you know, as always, they can be a little bit unkind. Um, and I don't think he looked too bad in it, but he was always a pleasure to work with. Lovely man.
And always doing practical jokes, from what I understand. So, and anything particularly sort of like a couple of moments that spring to mind?
Well, I mean, over the years, I mean, there was always a laugh and a joke on the set when Roger was around. And, I used to put if I was firing a pellet gun at or close to him, um, I'd on one occasion borrowed there was a gaffer Spark who had very thick um, glasses, Um, and I borrowed those and said to Roger just before we turned over, "Can you wave your hand so I can see where you are?" Which is a bit daunting when somebody's holding a gun firing pellets all around you. But you know, Octopussy, I think I ended up dressed as a gorilla climbing through the jungle just to surprise him on a scene that you know he wasn't expecting. But you know, those things happened all the time because it was, you know, the bonds were so like, you know, they were hard to work on, and at times it was fraught, but there was always a bit of humor and um, a sort of easier going attitude than you see on most movies today.
Mm. Going back to the car chase and when the car is split in two, I take it it's not just the simple thing of just cutting half the car. You've got to then do other stuff too. I assume.
Yeah, I mean, we used a front wheel drive car, obviously, so it could carry on um, driving afterwards. And I think Remy's guys, I can't remember exactly where the dividing line came on all this stuff. Um, but other than to say, you know, we work very closely together on all those movies. Um, but yeah, the front half had to be able to carry on driving and be steerable afterwards. So it had wheels hidden underneath the, the back of the where the brake was. Um, and then there was a special trigger device for it to split when the time came. Um, all those gags were, you know, just sort of one after the other all the way through the film. So it's one of the things that made this film, for me, you know, really enjoyable because there was so much going on, and you know, all the time we were doing this, we were prepping model airships and trying to figure out how we were going to do all those complicated sequences.
How much prep time do you have on a film like this?
Um, oh, it can be anything between 3 and 6 months, depending. Um, but you have to, you know, sort of look at the schedule as you go because, you know, if you're doing one of these, you're probably shooting for, you know, 5 months. So as long as some of the more difficult things are spread out through the film and not all in the first month, then you can, you know, schedule things to work because, you know, again, back in those days, I had a, you know, a limited crew. I mean, it's not like some of the movies today where, you know, the special effects, let alone the number of people on the visual effects side, but the special effects can have a crew of 100, 120. Back on these films, I had a crew of 30 or 40, and that was to look after the first unit, the second unit, the underwater unit, and the model unit. They were all filming at the same time.
Mm.
So it was it it was challenging, but you know, it was one of those films where you used to wake up in the morning and look forward to going to work.
And you probably worked with the same people for a number of films, so you knew you could kind of leave them to do whatever they were doing. You
Yeah, I mean,
trusted the people you were with.
I had the um, well, I've always said, you know, I've had the benefit of the best crews um, throughout my career, but you know, all those guys who, worked on this for me, all went on to be supervisors in their own right. And people like Neil and Chris Corbold and Joss Williams, they were all part of the team on this, at, one level or another. And yeah, I used to try and spend as much time as I could doing the model work because I really enjoyed it. But when we were filming in San Francisco, which we'll get to a bit later on, I would, on the last few days we were in San Francisco, I'd be working on the main unit live action during the night, and possibly a little bit on the second unit who were night shooting at the same time. And then during the day, I'd be shooting with my own unit on the Golden Gate Bridge, because I did all the fight sequence on the top of the real bridge, all the background plates, all the helicopter shooting, dummies falling off the bridge into the water. So, I was working day and night for, I think, 4 or 5 days. So by the time we got on the plane home, I slept all the way back, I think.
Just think of the opening sequence with you had the radio controlled helicopter models.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that there was a couple of those failed and you had a few to play with?
Well, there were a few issues with them. One, because this was sort of early-ish days of radio control, used in that way, and so all the controls and the firing controls were on the one radio control unit that the pilot had, and I think there was one occasion where he landed it or did something, and it blew up prematurely. But they were filming in Iceland. They were out on an ice lake and floating icebergs, which was, really cold in the first place to run and fly a model helicopter. And the weather up there at the time was very unkind. So they were really struggling to get all the shots in. So whenever there was a window of sunshine where they could shoot, it was a little bit rush and tear, which of course adds to the pressure on the guys who are doing it. So, I think there were a few problems, but personally, I put it down to, all of the factors that were going on. It wasn't just a simple mistake or error by somebody. There were a lot of good reasons for it. But the good thing is, we built 3 helicopters to do that sequence. So, you see all the stuff with a helicopter flying around. You see it flying over the ice lake and the glaciers. You see the flare go off inside. You see it flying with the red smoke coming from it. And then you see it crash and blow up. we did all that with the three models. So, you know, at the end of the day, that's why you buy three models and don't start off with one.
Yeah.
Um, yes, it was touch and go, but yes, we got it, you know.
And I take it the submarine wasn't that particularly comfortable to drive, and it must have been quite cold. And wasn't there lots of fumes that the driver had to keep coming up out for air and stuff?
What in the boat?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think I
yeah. I
read
mean,
somewhere that it wasn't
you know,
the best.
the boat was, I say, powered by an outboard motor, where the exhaust comes out under the water. But of course, the outboard couldn't be outside the iceberg because you couldn't see it. You didn't want to see it. So
Yeah,
we had to build the motor inside. And all right, we put fans in there and, you know, different things to ventilate it. But, you know, we always knew that that was going to be a problem. So, you know, don't start the engine too early. Do the shot, open the hatch, and you know, let the fresh air in. Um, you know, it's all part of the. I have to say, part of the plan at the time, and that, you know, this was what 50 years ago.
getting that way, isn't it? Yes, yeah.
So, um, you know, it was a different world. We didn't quite have the technology then that we have now. So um, I think it would be fair to say everything went according to plan,
Hmm.
and we got around the problems as we went.
Yeah, 'cause this is 80. Well, you're filming in 84, so that'll
Yeah,
be yeah,
40 years,
40 years
40 years.
years on. Yeah. Um, we're just seeing that the stable sequence, and of course the horse box goes down, so I think you'd have to build that on a
Yeah,
elevated
we built
stage.
a lift for that in the stage. Um, and yeah, I can remember doing this on A stage, I think it probably was at Pinewood, where they've got a tank so that we could, you know, build the set over the tank and have a lift in there.
Do you remember Patrick McNee at all?
Yeah, I mean, Patrick was lovely man. His daughter was actually a very close friend of the girl who I was living with at the time. Um, and so you know, I knew Patrick quite well. And again, you know, another lovely man. Pleasure to work with. That shot there, where you see the lift come down, there wasn't a lift moving at all. It was just a board going past the windows.
Yeah, it's a simple thing, but it's very effective, isn't it? And sort of,
Yeah,
well, I remember seeing Octopus when Roger's under the train, and it's just a background moving on a
yeah,
yeah
rotating
yeah.
treadmill.
'Cause of course Roger and Patrick knew each other from the Avengers and the Saint when they were on opposite studios at Elstree, so they of course had a great rapport in the film, don't they?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Well, they're both really nice people. You know, good actors.
Mm.
Um, knew what they were doing. Both had a sense of humour.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think the whole master manservant thing is again a joy
Yeah,
to watch. Um, but we're coming up to the fight in the microchip factory, and I think there's some good bits with the villains getting trapped in the containers, and so you again would have had an involvement in that.
yeah. We filmed that in a real factory down in Swindon, most of it. But I know we had to build some rigs for it. Um, again, um, there's so much water gone under the bridge
Mm.
since then. Trying to remember how we did every gag is a little challenging. Um, but I'm sure when it comes up, I will remember
Mm.
some of it, if not all of it.
So you've got to be, of course, round while they're filming this, just in case there's any kind of little changes and things that might come up.
Yeah, I mean, anything major on these films, I try to be on the set when they were happening, and I, I pretty sure this was all filmed down in Swindon. Um, some of the gags were, quite difficult because you're dealing with stunt guys and machines and um, mechanics that you have to be able to control. Um, and um, I think there was certainly some of this stuff was on a film set at Pinewood, um, but I can't remember exactly where the dividing lines are.
Yeah.
Um, but that last shot, for instance, with the bang going around his eyes, was all stuff that we did with second unit. And I think one of those shots was certainly shot in reverse, where we pulled the band off, and it looked like it had gone on.
Mm. And this is a redress of well, you've got the ballroom at Pinewood, and you've got a little offshoot room, and they elevated the off the floor because the only
Right,
reason you can tell is there's a little fountain, isn't there, at one end,
that's
but
right. It was the old swimming pool,
hmm,
um, because we had a swimming pool at Pinewood, which I don't think I ever saw full. And we had a squash court there as well, both over behind the restaurant. So I think this we filmed in there, and um, Grace was certainly an interesting character to work with on the set.
yeah.
She was um, a feisty lady.
Hmm. I mean, she seemed to be somebody that enjoyed working on the film, and quite a feisty character, but she seemed to be quite pleasant from what everybody sort of
Oh
says.
yeah,
And
I mean there was um, nothing nasty about her at all. I mean she was lovely, um, but she certainly was a character. Let's say.
and did you have much to do with Christopher Walken?
Um, I did towards the end, and especially leading up to his death on the Golden Gate Bridge, um, and filming all that because we filmed that with him on a set on the back lot at Pinewood.
Hmm.
We had Golden Gate bridges all over the place, so I did pretty much all the shooting on the real bridge in San Francisco. Um, but then I had a scale model um, of pretty much the whole bridge that worked with a 20-foot model airship. It was 20 foot. Um, then I had the very top of the bridge, just one tower, which worked with a 40-foot long airship. And then another smaller model, I think, that we filmed with probably a 4 foot long model airship, which was fiberglass. But the middle-sized model, we did a lot of stuff, and we built the bridge out on the back lot of Pinewood, and then put a photographic cutout of the San Francisco skyline behind it, and I could fly the smaller model in over that with a crane, which gave us sort of fairly wide shots. And then for the closer stuff, we had a 40-foot model that was inflatable. So that was actually built in a proper vinyl skin, which I can talk a little bit more about when it comes up on the screen, because it'll be easier to explain.
Yeah. Because your first brush with Bond was Casino Royale, the David Niven version. Do you remember working on that and Orson Welles?
Yeah. I was on that for the best part of nearly a year. I worked with all 7 directors in 3 different studios, maybe 4 different studios. The challenge was waking up in the morning and remembering which studio to go to that day. And I worked with all of the Bonds. So I worked with David Niven, Woody Allen, Peter Sellers, Terence.
Somebody Cooper, I think it was.
Terence
Cooper, I think.
It was Terence Cooper. And I say all 7 directors, from John Huston. It was an interesting director to work with. He was playing a part in the film as well, so I had to whip his toupee off in the scene and create a blast of an explosion. We did that on the back lot at Pinewood. And then the first director was Joe McGrath, who was Peter Sellers' protege, but ended up not getting on with Peter Sellers like a lot of other people didn't. So Peter managed to get Joe fired, I think. A lovely man called Bob Parrish took over, who I worked with again after that. And we did the scene with Orson Welles and Sellers, but they wouldn't work together on the set, so we had to shoot everything across the back of our table on different days to get the characters. Dick Talmadge, who was an old Hollywood stuntman, did a whole action sequence on it. Val Guest worked with him at MGM, and oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the other 2. Tony Squires was one. Did some second unit with him, and there was one other that I worked with at Pinewood again. So we were all over the place.
And weren't you doing the console sequence with Orson Welles, and there was a special effects as the console blew up?
Oh yeah, it was his demise at the end of the film. He was in the control room and it all had to blow up. And I rigged it all up. And when he came on the set, I explained to him what was going to happen. I said, you've got to fall forward and dead. Now, when you fall forward, put one hand here and one hand there. Whatever you do, don't put them there. So, of course, what does he do? He puts them both where I told him not to. So it scorched his hand a little bit. It's nothing serious, but he jumped up, said ouch, and then called me a lot of names and stormed off the set. Bob knew it wasn't my fault, Bob Parrish, and said, could I rig it up again? Which I did. And then Orson came back on the set for take two. And full credit to him. I mean, I was 20 years old. He stood up in front of everybody before we did the shot and said, I owe this young man an apology. The reason I got burnt was my fault, not his. And I thought, well, there aren't many actors would do that.
No.
And it left me with a very good feeling about Paulson, I must say.
Yeah, that's very nice of him. But there's some lovely gags we're watching now with the fences, and
Yeah,
that's be quite good to do.
yeah, we rigged all these. Kenny Morris, who worked for me, made all these rigs, and we filmed this just outside Paris, near Chantilly, I think it was. And again, it was quite a fun fun sequence to do, as always, because you know you're doing things that are different all the time, and you know it's you know a great combination of stunt work and special effects and creativity, good direction, working with great people.
So you actually got to go to Shanti and see the house and everything.
Yeah, I mean we were in all these locations, and you know the other great thing about the Bonds is you know you're privileged to get to go to places where you wouldn't otherwise go. I mean, how many people have gone up to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge and walked 100 feet down the main cable?
Mm.
As nervous as I was doing it, but
Well, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. This is Cody Buckley's Rolls Royce, isn't it? That they use in the film, I believe. Um, I did hear that Patrick McNee was very nervous when he had to go through the gates of because of course they were meant for horse-drawn carriages, and Cody Buckley of course was eagle-eyed watching that, you know, it definitely happened to his car. So that sounds a bit. I don't think I would want to have done that.
this sequence we filmed just outside Denham, in Buckinghamshire, and we um, started up an old Rolls Royce to pull into the water, you know, taking all the oil out of it, and I think we probably left the engine in because we needed the weight to make it sink. And then for Grace pushing it in, we did that with a cable. We buried cable underwater out in the lake, and we actually towed the car out into the lake and pulled it down. And then Johnny Morris and I had to put on diving gear and go out and find it, so that we could float it with, I think we floated it with airbags and pulled it out because we couldn't leave it in the lake. And then this we filmed it all in the tank in D stage, A stage or D stage of Pinewood, which again has got a tank in the middle. So we built up the walls of the tank to make it deep enough. And all these gags, again, we did for real, you know, the air bubbling through that he could breathe. This was a rig we put in. You know, as I was saying earlier, it was one of those scenes where I'd be on one stage, 1 minute bone dry, in a diving suit the next minute, doing something on that, and then on the back lot doing another model shot half an hour later. But it was in the days when I could run from stage to stage, and I don't know, you just life was lived on adrenaline, I suppose.
And was that why you wanted to retire after Harry Potter's? Just although you obviously do it still very busy, but just because it's you got to be quite, you know, young to sort of do it, or was that a factor? Or
The Potters were good, and they were work. I'd missed the second Casino Royale because I'd already committed to work on a Paul Verhoeven film about the Crusades, and so I didn't get to do Casino, and then when Die Another Day happened, I came back on to look after all the model stuff, and Chris, of course, was looking after the live action, which he'd done on Casino. So, you know, that worked quite well. Die Another Day was never my favourite Bond. I always felt it lent far too much into a CGI world that didn't work for what we were doing. But, you know, that was not my decision to, you know, write the script that way. And you know, Lee Tamahori, you know, was a nice guy to work with, but I think for me as a Bond, it just didn't work. You know, I was already doing the Potters, but I was able to do a Potter and a Bond at the same time, which was, I think, the second Potter, and Die Another Day. And that sort of firmly convinced me never to try and do two pictures at the same time again. It's brain damage. You know, the Potters were nothing like as much fun to work on as the Bonds for obvious reasons. But they were a really nice couple. There's a very good shot coming up in a minute, which is going back to the 20-foot airship I was talking about earlier. And if you see the little man come out the bottom of the airship, I mean, that dummy was about 4 inches high. And the airship, that was a kicking dummy that we made, that I dropped out of a helicopter just out past the Golden Gate Bridge into the sea. We flew it out in a helicopter and filmed from the land with a long lens. But the little man, that shot is the 20-foot airship over the model on the back lot with a photographic cutout. The one I was talking about with the little figure coming out, that was the 40-foot airship, which was, we could either inflate it with air and hang it from above so that all the wires were out of the top. So we used that for shots from underneath. And then if we got shots higher up, then we could fill it with helium and tether it from 2 wires from down below. That meant whatever the shot was, I could always make sure that the wires weren't going to be a problem to paint out or to lose. And although we used all the painting tricks and photographic tricks to lose the wires, again, this was all pre-CGI where you can't paint them out afterwards. What was interesting was that the airship itself had curtains inside from the top and from the bottom, and you had to lace these together when the airship was inflated in order to keep the integrity of the shape. If you didn't have those, it could go way out of shape. So these curtains ran the length of the airship on several of the scenes, and you literally lace them together, which is exactly the same as a real airship of that type. Unfortunately, to be able to lace it together, you had to crawl up a 2-foot flexible tube to get into the airship in the first place, which was a little bit claustrophobic. Then once you were inside, of course, you could stand there and do it. The only problem was when it was full of helium, you couldn't breathe inside. So I went inside to do the lacing because I didn't want to ask somebody else to do it. I thought it was a bit risky. And I took an underwater demand valve on a long hose. And I thought, well, I'll just breathe through that. What I didn't take, which I should have done, is a mask to block my nose off, because as you're breathing, of course, you're still breathing a bit in through your nose. So I ended up inside a helium-filled airship doing the lacing, and suddenly started to feel very woozy, and realized I was not breathing enough air, and had to get out down the 2-foot tube in a hurry. But that whole sort of sequence worked very well, because we were able to do all those shots from above and underneath, and do them on different days with different inflatable stuff. The weather, of course, in England made life difficult, because if it was the slightest bit windy, trying to control a 40-foot airship is not the best of things to do. And then at the end, we filled it full of hydrogen for when we blew it up, so it would all burn.
I think this is quite a good sequence with the propeller and the water, and of course trying to make that practical, but look dangerous, but not, must have been a bit tricky.
Again, it was creating the look of the propeller, and the look of the current. When you actually look carefully at the propeller, you'll see there's no angle on it. It's just flat.
Mm.
But again, we had to be sure that none of the actor or anything could get caught in it because it was going around quite fast. And at the same time, we had to create the look of the current that the propeller was supposed to be creating. And I think we used underwater scooters and, turn them round so that they were making the current flow through the tube.
You said at the beginning of the when we were talking about the opening sequence about the bullet hits in the snow. Did you have to put like little explosions in the snow to do that, or?
Yeah, we put little sort of almost like little tiny mortar cups in the snow with a powder in, and we um, for a lot of them we used a thing called a specimen 6, which is what gave the brilliant orange flashes, and they were a lot more powerful than a normal bullet hit. But apart from the blast, they also gave off smoke, which looked like snow, and a bit more power. So if they were buried in a little mortar, you'd get a sort of bullet hit effect from them. Others we used little pieces of primer cord on a plastic detonator, and just blew dust up in the air. Those were quite good because you could lay them quickly and easily, and you could almost pre-make them up in a bag or a tube, with the white powder, and then just lay them in the snow, cover them over, and pile them off.
I think this is quite a grisly sequence coming up, and again, I think you would have. How would you have achieved this look? Because it's quite grotesque, isn't it? Really.
Yes, again, it's smoke and mirrors. It's creating the look of the turbulence, introducing red dye in the water for the blood, lots of bubbles. I mean, you need to show enough to put over exactly what's happening without being too graphic, and you know, tin lumps of chopped meat.
Yeah, I think you think you're probably seeing more than you are. 'Cause it's not quite like in License to Kill with the shredding, drug
Yeah,
machine. That's obviously far more graphic, but you fit, you kind of you're buying an illusion, aren't you? And you think you're seeing perhaps more than
I mean,
you are.
License to Kill was actually very similar. It's just that you see a bit more of it.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, you don't actually see a limb go into the crusher, but it's done with light, coloured powder, air, um, and mechanics, um, to sort of create that effect.
Hmm. I think the shark attack in License to Kill is very well done. Do you remember how you did that one?
Um, yes, I had a company that I knew up in Los Angeles, um, made the shark's head for us. Um, and again, we used that underwater with I think we had a mechanism in it for, making the shark's mouth move. And again, it's just filming these things in the right way with the right cuts, and it's where working with people like John Glenn, Arthur Worcester, was always so good, because between us all, we could figure things out, much more so than some of the directors today who just want to turn it over to CGI, and let somebody create it who possibly doesn't have the the, the reality concept to do it properly, whereas what we were doing was for real. And I've always said working with John Glenn was great, because you'd all get a script. John would talk to the storyboard artists and get them to do the storyboard, and John would explain to them what he wanted. We'd then get the storyboards and look at them, and then sit down around a table and say, well, how are you going to do it? And, on occasions we'd say, well, John, we can do that, but, that one shot there's will cost $1 million. Whereas if we change it and we do this and the other, we could make it work for a lot less, which of course appealed to Cubby and Tom Pevsner. So John would then say, well, go and work with, whoever the storyboard artist was on that particular sequence, and bring it back to me and we'll talk about it. So, I'd go off, or whoever would go off, and we'd sit down and say, well, we do this shot and that shot and that shot. And, between us, it was a much more collaborative experience, which I think got the best of everybody's work. Alec Mills or Alan Hume, whoever was doing the lighting, Peter Lamont on production design. We all jigsawed together incredibly well, and that's what I think comes up on the screen on these movies.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just we mentioned the shark sequence. One of I think probably the best shark film since Jaws probably was Deep Blue Sea, which you did, and that's a very good mixture of CGI plus animatronics.
Yeah,
and I think it must have been quite to have these big sharks in actual water tanks and stuff. It would have been quite unnerving, even though you built them. It looked so real.
Walt Conti built the sharks, which I have to say was some of the best animatronic work I've ever seen to this day. But again, they were computer controlled, and that was nearly 30 years ago now, and computer technology has advanced an awful lot since then. So, I can remember being in the middle of a set in the stage in Rosarita, the water tank in  standing 4 feet away from a shark which weighed 1.5 tons, and all of a sudden this thing would rear out of the water, crash into the roof of the set, and crash back down again, completely unannounced. And it was just a computer glitch, which, it wasn't really Walt's fault. It was part of the system. So, we were all a little bit wary when these things were live on the set. But, nobody got hurt. We all had enough sense without having a health and safety man breathing down our neck, telling us, what to do and what not to do all the time.
Yeah. Because that must increase the production time. You've got health and safety checking every possible thing. That must sort of just make it more complicated.
I personally, I think it was a lot safer in those days because people had to rely on their own intelligence. And, I'd appreciate there's a, very good reason for health and safety in certain areas, but it's so over the top in some areas that it's counterproductive, and some productions make you do risk assessments now with a health and safety person, and they're 4 pages long. They're covered in all sorts of different colours and hieroglyphics and God knows what. And what I had always found is that if you do a risk assessment, keep it simple so that people will read it. If it's so complicated and long and overblown that people don't read it, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And you want people to read and understand what's going on. That's the whole point of them. And so, I think that sort of proves what I'm trying to say is that common sense is more important than treating people like children.
Keep it simple and common sense. Because if you treat people like children, then they forget how to look after themselves, and you get sort of counterproductive, really.
And I've always said, if I build a rig, then I'll stand up and be responsible for it. And I've never shied away from that. But there's so many people now so afraid that they're going to get sued or charged when they've, although they might have the producer's hat on, they can't be responsible really for everything everybody on the production does 24 hours a day. It's got to disseminate down.
I think this would be the fight in the house. I think is quite interesting because it's a real location, and it's a very sort of protected, building because of its historical significance. So when you're in there and you've got to take the banister out, put yours in, and quite a lot to do on that.
Yeah, I mean that was the house in San Francisco again. I really can't remember if we had a small set at Pinewood or not. We may well have done, but all the jumping over balconies and in and out of windows, it all got done. It all got done safely and well. Good stunts. Um, the effects were all there. Everybody worked together again.
Again, it's testimony to how good that the film is made, that you is not entirely sure whether it's location or stage. I think it is a very seamless, and it might have been a stage possibly. How did you get the rock salt sort of effect from the gun?
Oh, blimey. How did we? I don't know. I think the gun firing was we just preloaded um, blanks, um, which were probably not full charge blanks, but half charge. But then probably put something like talcum powder um, on top of them so that you've got that, sort of white puff out. Um, and what the effect was on where they hit, I honestly can't remember.
It's a very good effect, I think, and a very good sequence. So do you have much to do with the stunt crew? Because of course you've got people like Doug Robinson and lots of very
Yeah, I mean,
stunt crews.
we worked closely together all the time because I think Martin Grace was on this one. Um, and I can remember going back to the Golden Gate Bridge with the fight on the top, which we've yet to come to. I filmed the stuff with Martin and another stuntman, um, actually down on the main cable that we shot from the top of the bridge looking down. And they were standing on the platform that we built because we had to take a VistaVision camera down there and mount that on the platform for all the plate shots. And I can remember that the VistaVision didn't have a particularly good viewfinder, and it had a prism on the top that you had to get over and look through. So by the time you got the VistaVision looking straight down off the cable, you had to lean right out off the cable to get to the viewfinder to see the framing. I mean, again, this was before video assist. Um, and, being on the cable was one thing, but being on your hands and knees, leading out, looking down at 740 feet was something else.
Mm. It was a stuntman called Dick Zicker who doubled Christopher Walken
Yeah.
on the Golden Gate Bridge, and Dick did a lot of Roger Moore's stunt work. He was doing stuff in the sequence we just saw, and I think he does a lot on the fire trucks, which we'll come to in a bit. Um, Obviously, that there was an awful lot of assistance that the city of San Francisco gave the production. What was it a very good city to work in?
Oh yeah, I mean they were great. I mean, Diane Fernberg, who was the governor at the time, even let us into her office um, in the building because we used the real city building, um, and we had to make it look as though it was on fire.
Mm.
So we rigged all that up with gas burners on the roof, and I had some really big sodium flares made by a company in Middle America somewhere. Um, and we put those up on the roof. That's what gave the wonderful incandescent glow up on the top of the building and the smoke.
Mm.
And then we enhanced that with extra smoke and propane burners. But the whole setup was had to be done with full cooperation of the fire department and everybody else. And they were very helpful in getting us fire engines and rigging them up. We had to rig the ladder on the fire truck with a separate hydraulic pump so that we could control it swinging backwards and forwards and in and out while the truck was driving up the road. And again, we did all that out in San Francisco. I'd taken on a small American crew with Larry Kavanagh and Bruce Stanheimer to help back up my team. And then I brought out a team from UK to really mostly look after the main unit and my unit. Yeah, it was all interesting stuff. And as I say, if you look through the whole spectrum of effects throughout the movie, there's an awful lot of different things happening and going on all the time.
Because I think after probably the parachute, which I hear was quite difficult because there was lots of permissions and there was people jumping off the Eiffel Tower before the stunt. So there people that thought, well, we really want people then going to this and copying the Bond film. So it seemed a bit precarious. And then of course they had the rogue Bond stuntman who did an unauthorized jump as well. So to suddenly go to San Francisco must have been quite a change of, you didn't have the worries you had in Paris.
Well, I mean, I was backwards and forwards all the time because I was, I'd go out to San Francisco for a few days or a week to set things up or, buy the vehicles. I ended up down in Los Angeles organizing cars and vehicles for some reason. Only because I was going to be there. And so they asked me, oh, while you're there, could you do this, that, or the other? But, I had to tie up the American crew, the workshops, get the permissions, explain to the, it's all part of the process. And, even, going up the Golden Gate Bridge, and setting all that up, working out all the angles for the plates, what lenses we were going to use, all that stuff was great fun and interesting to do at the time.
So we're coming up to the very impressive sequence. So of course you've got obviously the exterior is in San Francisco, but everything else is obviously on stages in Pinewood. A lot of fire effects, and I suppose always a lot of nerves with fire, no matter how controlled.
Yeah, I mean, doing the fire on the exterior set was a big challenge. We even had it, I think, coming out of some of the windows. But then we had this whole lift shaft sequence where they're climbing out the lift and there's fire in the lift shaft. And so, you've got stunts involved in this. You've got, this scene coming up now with the flames coming up. Every one of these shots involves Um, uh, in fact, a safety uh, consideration. Um, you've got Roger Moore and the actress there 1 minute, stunt double the next minute, wires breaking, lifts dropping, um, and I can remember it was quite difficult at the time because, if you're shooting in a vertical tube with fire, of course, controlling the heat um, is very tricky, when you've got actors and people and camera crews um, in there as well. And I think that was a model shot,
Probably the going down the shaft, yeah.
But then you see we've got this little cut there of the exterior, but there's more coming up. And yeah, it was oh, I can remember Tanya Roberts hanging there in the middle of all the smoke and flame. But the actors again were always very good, um, very trusting. Looking at some of the things they were asked to do, uh, and somebody like Tanya comes onto a Bond. They don't know any of us. They've never worked with us before, um, and we're saying, well, look, we're going to set everything on fire around you, but don't worry, it'll be fine. But they're great. Um, and
She's not wearing too much, is she, Tanya?
no, I mean, you can't exactly put an asbestos suit on her. So her arms and her legs are all bare, her hair's bare. And I say, with all those flames going on around her in a vertical tube, you've got to be really careful.
Mm.
And you know, just looking at the building there. I mean, you've got the main city hall, which is all white marble or whatever stonework was. You can't blacken it, damage it, crack it, but you've got to make it look as though it's on fire.
Mm.
And it was, yeah, it was an interesting shoot. In fact, just outside there was a set of traffic lights, and I was in the car with the chief fire marshal. And he went across a red light somehow. He was driving me somewhere, and we got hit by another car and spun round, which was quite daunting with everything else going on. So it had a real life car accident as well as everything else.
Yeah. And I suppose it's just trying to let the people of the city know that this is obviously filming and stuff. So
Yeah,
I imagine some people would have thought you've really set because it's very impressive, isn't it? How
yeah,
it turned out.
yeah. I mean, again, that whole sequence is um, quite fun. It's still got a humorous aspect to it. It's all quite believable, I think.
Mm.
Um, and it was all filmed in camera. Um,
As long as you have the fire hoses go over the building rather than too
Yeah,
direct,
I
it's not going to damage the
mean,
glass or anything, is it? So
it's all water. I can't remember exactly where the water went on the other side, but it didn't do any damage to anything. I mean, it's one of those things that you look at early on and think, oh, that'll be fine. And you ask the fireman, you're all happy with that? Oh, yeah, that'll be fine. Um, and oh,
and I think at least one office worker forgot to close his window, and I think when he went the next day, there was quite a bit of water in his office. But
probably there's always one, isn't there? I mean, there's always something that proves the point, but um, it's it's never anything that major, and quite frankly, it helps the publicity. It gets a bit more notice out there, doesn't it?
so
This,
you having to customize the fire truck here and doing some bits and pieces
yeah, I
to it.
mean, this was the one that we had to um, rig. I mean, Remy's guys drove it again. They customised the one that did the jump over the bridge, which again they did for real. We had to do a lot of work on all the police cars that go up the bridge and get stuck. And we had to safety those off with cables and release hooks so that we could have the bridge right up with the cars stuck on them, but only let them come down when we wanted. Um, this was another rig that we did with both cars stuck together. And then we did the hydraulic motor and the ladder that would swing out so we could control that. Then I think it was Martin did most of that gag. And of course, there's a big second unit. John Glenn often used to leave most of it to the second unit, but then he'd come over for 1 or 2 days or nights, whatever it was, and shoot, whatever close-ups he could with the main unit to get it live on in camera. And then of course we'd end up with the real close-ups being done in the studio afterwards, in front of well, back on in those days it was mostly front projection. Did a little bit of blue screen, I think, but not much. It was mostly from FP, with Charlie Stafford back in those days.
And with the bridge, because I believe it was obviously all bridge obviously counterbalanced with these big
Yeah.
sort of concrete, and obviously if you're putting cars on top of your, did the bridge sort of, do you have to make sure they were very light so you could, because it's all quite delicately.
Well, no, I mean the weight of the bridge was so enormous that you could practically put a 747 up there and not make a difference. But we did this gag for real with, I say, with Remy Julia driving one of his cars. I can't remember which one. But he did this jump, which was pretty daunting because that's a big old lump fire truck.
Yeah.
I can't remember how fast he was. Then we did this shot with the car actually going off the edge, but we had it tethered so it couldn't go too far. Then we had the cars tied off so that we could control them for these shots. and I think we did the wheel spinning for real on the bridge. That release there. That was just a effect of the car, and then this we actually did for real. But I think we doctored the shock absorber. We probably took the shock absorbers off the car and did some pre-cutting so that we worked out where the weight was going to come.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it all worked well, and we used what we could for real.
And I was just going back, but just a little thought when you did the Renault taxi smashing in half. Of course, you got to change where the fuel tank is, don't you? And
Oh
kind of.
yeah, I mean, well, on gags like that, what you do is you lose the whole full size fuel tank completely, because you don't want fuel spilling everywhere, and you don't want a big tank that's either full or empty. Because empty ones are more dangerous, more likely to blow up. So you put a very small tank in, probably under the bonnet, that just holds a couple of pints, and it's just enough to do each take or each particular gag. So it gives you the safety of knowing that you're not going to have petrol pouring all over the road or diesel oil or whatever. This whole sequence coming up now is, of course, Zorin's mine and the flooding, which again was a lot of live action and a lot of model work.
You at the Amberley Chalk Pit Museum, aren't you, for
Yeah,
this?
I mean, we filmed all this exterior stuff down at Amberley, including the shot of the airship coming over.
And you mentioned obviously that Tony Roberts was quite a good sport when it came to the flame effects. What did you think of Tanya as a person? Because of course she very, very sadly died a year or so ago, far too young. Was she a lovely person from your point of view?
She was. She was, very nice, very amenable, and always quite charming. In fact, there you go. If you can see,
Oh,
and that.
oh yeah, oh, that's lovely. So that's a gift she gave.
Yeah, she gave
Yeah.
certain members of the crew. I don't know how many of us, but I've got one and a full Al Sheldon Western artist who made these things. So still got the original John Richardson special effects supervisor on the box. I don't know what it was doing there. I only came across it a little while ago.
Yeah.
But it's quite weighty. Love Tanya Roberts, 1984. Hey ho.
Oh, that's a lovely thing to have, and yeah, very, very, very thoughtful when people do that. Yeah. Um,
Pictures of Michelle Pfeiffer in Lady Hawk. That's another film.
yeah. because of course this was a number of stages we used for the mine interior, because of course the 007 stage had burnt down during the filming of Legend. Do you remember hearing the news that the stage had gone up?
I remember hearing it in the Pinewood restaurant. We were all in the restaurant having lunch, I think with Cubby. And back in those days, there was in the restaurant a number of lights up on the wall with numbers. And if they needed um, somebody from the Pinewood staff, they would put up certain numbers. And there was an emergency number. Couldn't tell you what it was now, but I can remember we all looked up and saw this emergency number coming up, which meant something was up somewhere, fire or something. So we all rushed outside and saw this plume of smoke coming from the 007 stage. We went up there and stood and watched it burn down. And I mean, there was nothing we could do. There were gas bottles blowing up all over the place. There were sheets of corrugated iron floating off up into the sky like leaves. And we're all standing there thinking, shit, what's this going to do to the movie? And Peter got together with the local construction company, and you know, they tore the ruins down and rebuilt it in, I think, 3 months, which was quite an amazing feat. So we had it ready to put in the full-size mine, main cavern, and the model of it. So we did a lot of the water work in the full-size set, which we were then able to flood, but slowly. Obviously, it took a long time to fill up the water tank to 6 feet, whatever it was. But then we built the model, which I could fill up much quicker. And we did a lot of the intercut stuff, as always, with, you know, live action and model. And as long as you're doing that intercutting and not relying totally on you know, model shot, then you know, it works and makes the whole thing a lot more believable.
Were you there at the ceremony when they reopened the stage?
Yeah, I think so. It was it's all a bit of a blur now. It's
Well, yeah.
there was so much going on at the same time, and we were all going backwards and forwards, and you know, trying to build the set ready to go into a half-built stage. And there was all sorts of, you know, sort of health and safety concerns during the construction period, which was, you know, that was understandable.
Yeah.
But
So the burning of the stage didn't mean that the locations or anything had to change. Of course, I assume those had been booked so much in advance that you purely couldn't change the schedule from location point of view.
well, the locations didn't really matter with this, because the interior was all set, and you know, the exterior at Amberley was just the mouth of the cave, which could lead into anything. So that didn't really affect it.
There's enough sort of offshoots and different places though in the mine where you can do it on smaller stages, you can sort of break it up a bit as they, of course,
Yeah,
had
I
to do.
mean, we had the corridor set, which can always be revamped with a few, bends and twists in it. That was a model shot. Then we had the vertical tube that they climb out of. We had, I think we had a set where we hung the roof and lowered the roof into the tank. So it looked like the water level was rising.
Ah, yeah.
It's a much easier way of introducing a lot of water. Do it the other way up, as it were. Then there was this shot here where he floods the stage, or floods the mine, and they then shoot all the people in the water. But all those shots were all, and this shot we filmed down at harbour, just outside.
Was it down the West Country somewhere? I think I've heard. I'm not sure it was that location, but
it was not far from. I'll remember the name of the harbour in a minute. It's just off Portsmouth, Southampton way, and this was model. This was all live action with tip tanks and things. This scene here, we had a barrage of hoses built on a moving platform that we brought forward into the set so that it looked like a thing. That was tip tanks going over. We did that was a model, the building collapsing, I think. We did a very interesting shot, which sadly didn't get in the movie, where we used the model and we had the two characters firing machine guns. And I put the two characters into the model by cutting a piece of mirror and inserting it into the model and standing the two actors on a rostrum behind the camera. So when you looked into the model, there were two real people standing there with machine guns. But I think it got lost in the cut somewhere.
And you got the bullet hits in the water, how would you have done the bullet hits in the water?
Yeah, I mean, again, you've got to be a bit careful doing that because of people's eardrums and, controlling it, maintaining it. But I think we used a marble gun as well, probably for creating the splashes in the water.
Am I right in saying you've got people on wires being dragged, so that it looks like the water's picking them, so you make it
yeah,
a bit more ferocious than it is?
There were all sorts of little, sort of momentary gags. Lankham Harbour, not Lankham Harbour. There was a harbour where the tide went out the long way. This was, of course, back to Amberley.
You just put a nice charge in the water and it makes like a nice sort of... would health and safety let you do that now? A big charge in the lake, or?
Well, it was the sea. It's the sea.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, you'd have to jump through hoops to do it, but I see no reason why we shouldn't if it's deep enough. I mean, depending on the fish there, one has to be careful of, these days. But um, on Bridge Too Far, we did lots of water explosions, and I'd always let small charges off first, which would scare the fish away, um, and then do the main one. This was a model shot, which again was a bit tricky to do, but it put over the effect,
Mm.
and we blew the airship up with some big fan motors.
Was Grace Jones quite good with the stunt work, being in the water and everything? Was she quite happy with that?
There was who? Sorry.
Was Grace Jones pretty
Yeah,
good with
yeah. I
the
mean,
stunt work?
they all seem to, get on and do it. I mean, Roger was always um, so good with it, and funny enough, I did it almost exactly those shots with him on a film called Gold years ago, um,
Yeah, that's a good film.
where the mine floods.
Mm.
Um, so, yeah, this was all model, um, and again, all the motors worked. This was for real down at Amberley. Um, and
I don't think Grace Jones was expecting all the sparks and things. From what John Glenn told me, he deliberately didn't want to warn her, so she would, so her reaction is real. It's a bit
quite
naughty of him, but
probably, I mean, those things are always fine, depending on the actor that you're dealing with. Some actors don't mind it and are happy because they've given a good reaction. Other actors tend to take a bit of umbrage, so you've got to
mm,
be a little bit careful. But for the most part, on Bonds, they're always pretty good.
mm.
Um,
So how did you get on the bonds in the first place? Was it because I take it you were always freelance like a lot of people in the industry, so was it just kind of sort of
yeah,
people you
well,
knew that got you on?
the first Doctor No, which was um, pretty low budget for what Bonds ended up.
Mm.
Uh, they used the Pinewood Special Effects Department, which was a permanent effects department, which was run by a guy called Frank George. And Johnny Steers worked for Frank um, as a model maker in the department. So they all um, did the first one, and then um, John took over from Frank on From Russia with Love. Um, and, as we know, John carried on doing them um, for quite a few years. Then I forget which Bond it was. It could have been, I don't think it was Live and Let, it could have been Man with the Golden Gun. One of them, anyway. Um, they wanted my father and I to do the effects. Um, but from what I understood at the time, it was around a period where Cubby and Harry weren't um, getting on.
Mm.
And one of them wanted Dad and myself to do it, and the other one wanted, I think it was John Steers to do it. And so um, to keep the peace, somebody suggested they get Derek Meddings to do it. So Derek took over for a while. And then when they were setting up Octopussy, um, somebody decided they'd ask me.
Mm.
Um, and of course, who was I to say no?
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been Live and Let Die, Man the Golden Gun time that Harry and Cubby
Yeah,
were sort of at that, so 72, 73 sort of
yeah,
time, I'm guessing.
yeah,
We probably must talk about the explosion here with Mayday. So again, it must have been quite fun to do a rather large explosion here.
yeah. I mean, again, it was doing a big explosion that looked real. Um, we um, had a real car on a track. We dug a big hole under the track and put a lot of dynamite in it.
Mhm.
Um, and built a lightweight cart that would run along it with a dummy of Grace on it, and blew the sucker up.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's very effective. I think that those shots. Um, so here we have the full size blimp coming after
Yeah,
Johnny Roberts here.
yeah.
Um,
So this did the initial flyover. Um, that we filmed um, at Amberley. We had the airship and a part of the underbelly on a crane, um, so we could do the swing in and grabbing Grace. And then this was a model shot that we shot at Pinewood with the dummy. And then these shots I did at in San Francisco um, with a stuntman whose name I'm trying to remember.
I think it was Jim Arnett, or
Yeah, Jim Arnett.
yeah.
He was Paul Newman's stunt double, and he did the famous jump into the water with Robert Redford, and I think damaged his back. That we did at Pinewood, um, and
So I take it it's under a helicopter there, sort of, I imagine, but
yeah,
you don't see the ship.
uh,
Um,
we had two helicopters, one with him hanging underneath, and one with a camera in it.
hmm.
Um, and then that again was that's the middle size airship. This was we shot in that was a model that was on the full size set on the back lot. Um, that was all model. Uh,
Would you have worked with people like Derek Meddings? Because of course, it'd be 11
I've worked with
models.
Derek on Moonraker
Hmm.
to a degree. Um, I always wanted us to get together and um, form a partnership, but somehow it never happened.
Hmm.
This was all model again. Um, that's one of my background plates. Um, I always tried to film those plates. We'd wait for boats to come along, but we had to get up to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge at 5 o'clock in the morning. And when we got up there, it was all covered in dew and wet, and all the main cables were wet and felt a bit slippery. This was live action.
And I take it it's not the nicest of places to get up to It's quite, I think it's quite a small elevator, and it's
That was one of my favourite shots. That was with Martin Grace
oh yeah, Martin Grace, yeah.
on the camera platform.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, that was him coming back up the cable. Um, that was back lot again. Um, the interesting thing was when you're those cables are 3 foot diameter, but you can be standing on it 100 feet down the cable, a bit further down than where they appearing to be. And when a truck drives over the bridge, the cable actually bounces up and down. You never notice it
Yeah.
unless you're standing there. But
And you feel it. Yeah.
mm,
Um, so do you get used to the height and after when you, I suppose,
did after a while, but it
yeah.
was
Mm.
it was a bit scary. That's that's the platform where we set up the. I'm pointing at something you can't see, but um, the platform they were standing on then is the one that we set up to put the camera on.
Mhm.
So we got a level platform. I had a very good grip who I borrowed from ILM in San Francisco, Dickie Dover, um, who did it. And then this shot that's coming up, I did that with a kicking dummy. And I was on uh, the one of the beams under the main roadway with the dummy. Set the camera up on the land, and then I threw the dummy off the beam, and the boys photographed it going down. But yeah, and
And unlike some bridge, like say the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Golden Gate was not designed for tourists or anybody apart from working. So was it quite a small elevator that went up? I
well,
read.
oh, here we go. We're just going to see it go back. Um,
So is that the medium-sized one that you've blown up there?
that's the
The
24.
full one. Yeah.
Um, so again, we had to sort of blow it up. We had it hanging on wires with releases so that we could blow it up and then drop it down.
Hmm.
That shows the thing. That shot there was Pinewood Tank in February, and we had to put heaters down the side of the tank to melt the ice off
Yeah.
the surface to be able
Nice.
to do that shot. And we
Hmm.
got the ripples with wind machines and dropped the envelope into it. But yeah, getting up to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, it took 7 minutes in a square. I regarded it as a coffin. It was about just over 2 foot square, very claustrophobic. And we'd have to put or as many camera boxes as we could in first. Then 2 or 3 of us would get in, and the operator would have to, one of the bridge people would have to take us up. So there'd be 2 of us and the operator and the boxes. It took 7 minutes to get to the near the top. All the time praying that there wasn't an earthquake while you were in there. And on one occasion we got to the top and we were so squashed in that nobody could reach the door handle to open the door to let us out. And we were all trying to get round. But then you'd open the door and you'd come out on a little platform. Then you'd have to walk up a almost vertical staircase to the next level.
Hmm.
Then you'd have to walk across to a vertical staircase. Then you'd go up that, open a hatch, and then you'd come out on top of the world. Um,
And all these, again, what you would have shot, or the behind the credits here.
that I think we possibly shot when we were on a recce, because we took a camera with us and we went straight from the airport to that very spot. And we filmed everything. But
Well, are there any names that we're seeing here that you'd like to particularly mention? Anybody that was?
well, all of them. I mean, Terry Madden. They're all Doris Spriggs, Tina Banter, Tiny Nichols, Michael Lamont, Ken Court, Alan Tompkins. Every single one. Roger Deere was one of the main sketch artists on it. My team. Every single one of them was a friend, and we did a lot of movies together between us. So it's memories of really good times. And sadly, there's very few of those names still around.
Well, yes, yes, it's one of the things that as a fan and people that worked on it, it is one of those certain films seem to be more unlucky than others, but the passage of time is catching up with us all, I think, really, these days. I must mention the gadget, the spy dog that Q has. That's I think quite a good one.
Snoopy, we built that in our workshop, and again, it was buy bits of different model kits, and Kenny Morris, who was really talented engineer, but put it all together. I think that Tony Dunsterville did the radio control for it, little servo motors and radios, but again, just one of those things you do along the way.
I just want to give a special mention to Peter Lamont, because the set design is so fantastic, and of course you'll have to work quite closely with him because so much of it has to be practical with the stunts and the action you've got in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd of course known Peter for many years, and back in the days when he was, virtually a set dresser and draftsman, and I worked with him on a lot of bombs, on Aliens, and lovely man, great mate.
He was always lovely to meet at conventions. He was really good with the fans. Do you remember seeing the film at the premiere, and were you very happy at the time?
Funny enough, I went to the. I'm sure I went to the premiere in this country, but more memorably, Peter and I were both in Los Angeles on a initial meetings with Jim Cameron for Aliens, and it was when they had the world premiere in San Francisco. And Cubby knew that we were going to be out there, so he said to Peter and I, "Will take your DJs with you," and he flew us up from LA, put us up in a hotel, and we went to the premiere in San Francisco.
Hmm.
Because I vaguely remember getting out of the limo when we arrived at the theatre, and as Peter and I got out, a huge scream went up, and Peter and I both sort of picked ourselves up a little bit, and then sadly realised it was the Duran Duran car that had pulled up behind us.
Yeah, the View to Kill song I think is fantastic, and Duran Duran's contribution was fantastic to the film. So how does this sit in amongst your other Bond films? Is it one you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, I mean it's there's an all of those early ones. I mean, I think um, Octopussy, View to a Kill, Living Daylights, and License to Kill are my favourites because I did and I was responsible for every effect on all of the films. So, you know, the visual effects, model work, everything. But then, you know, some of the later ones like Twine, I had such a challenging but great time doing the model work on those. And, you know, having my own unit out in the Bahamas or Mexico, wherever we were filming at the time, you know, they've got fond memories as well. So, you know, there's every Bond I've ever worked on, I've enjoyed.
Do you know what happened to the 4-foot blimp model?
Um, I did see it at a museum showing somewhere. It was in the Covent Garden one for a while, I think.
Oh, right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice that because you hear so many of these things getting phone skips and things, and it's
um,
nice that things do
it
exist
was
still.
around.
Hmm.
I mean, sadly, Bonds didn't realise the value of keeping things until, you know, many years later.
It's a modern obsession, I think. Well, it did back then, just checking the skip, and it wasn't so much of an issue. Well, thanks very much, John, for talking about A View to Kill. Is there any kind of comments you'd like to make before I let you go?
No, no, I mean, you know, I say it's just, for me, it's a great reminder of um, cooperation, camaraderie, um, getting it in camera for real.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a real testament to everything in camera filmmaking done for real, and those mixtures of when you're looking at the Golden Gate Bridge sequence at the end, you know, the models, the miniatures, the live action, you know, it's just flawless, isn't it, really? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, thanks very much, John. Well, thanks. Well, that's great. Lovely to talk to you as always, John, and
And you,
enjoy your weekend.
and I'll see you soon. Take
Yeah,
care.
will do. Take care. Thanks so
Bye.
much.